let's see. It's setting up and it looks like I believe we are actually streaming, Omar. Seems
Yeah,
like it.
my
So, yeah, hello everyone. And my name is Michelle Oliver. I'm the CEO and founder of Expitality. And almost every Friday at some point, I love to come on and just talk a little bit about what I've learned during the week. And I'm so delighted to be here today with Omar Boubès. Did I say it right? Boubès.
perfect.
It's French. This is now a French podcast. He said no. Anyway, we had such a wonderful conversation just a few weeks ago. And we were talking a little bit about branding. What is the name of your company, please? Since I just went away from your page. Studio Circa, right?
Yeah, Studio Circa.
Studio Circa. And Omar is the principal and creative director at Studio Circa, which is a strategy branding, and you do websites for boutique and independent hotels, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So because I work in outdoor hospitality and am kind of obsessed or at least deeply interested in bringing hotel best practices to the outdoor hospitality space, we had a great conversation about branding and tech, and we decided we would just jump on today and continue that conversation for the benefit of anyone who's listening and finds it beneficial. We'll just put it that way. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it,
Thank
Omar.
you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. So when I think, I don't know, why don't you kick us off? I think of branding. I always think of Marty Newmeyer, but I don't even know if you know him. That's my favorite thing. It's really like branding isn't what you think it is. It isn't even what you say it is. It's how your guest is feeling. And then we bring tech into it, and that can be a double-sided sword, right? Double-edged
Absolutely.
sword, or
Absolutely.
whatever
Yep.
that term is. What
Yeah,
are your
Brandon
thoughts?
Newmeyer is great. I've read most of his books, Zag, Brand Gap, and I know you mentioned him in your book as well. And
Oh,
you're
I
absolutely
did.
right. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah.
for actually reading it, by the way. That
Sure.
that's that is it's not everybody that can actually sit down and read a physical book, even though that was a very short, easy one. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great book, like I said, and I think it's you capture really well those special moments, not just from kind of working in the industry, but also the service you provide your guests. I think really it's beautifully written.
Thank
It's
you.
it's the emotion is clearly in the book. It's not kind of a neutral type of writing, and I really enjoyed reading it. So thank you for putting
Oh,
that and sharing that with us.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you. Wait for the next one. It will be more textbook.
About textbooks. I got a few here as well, so
Yeah.
I love that. But yeah, in regards to branding, it's exactly what you said. I think there's a conversation that needs to be had around um, people's perception of brands, because that's one of the key aspects. Brands can influence to a certain extent what people think about them, and this relates to any brand, but of course we're talking about hospitality. So when we're thinking of a brand, there's certain expressions of that brand, whether it's the visual language, whether it's the written language, copywriting, messaging, whether it's the actual guest experience, that's also part of the brand itself.
Mhm.
But the conglomeration of all of those things and perception and reputation is what the brand actually is out there in the wild. So I would say that branding as an activity is one thing, but brand perception from the outside in is another. And that's kind of what we're trying to influence with all the little activities that we do.
Right. So, most specifically, because we only have a short time this morning, how would you feel about talking about how tech affects that? I think that was a really interesting, and it's a conversation. It's very timely, obviously, because people are jumping on the bandwagon. Good for everyone who is. You must. And yet, we touched a little bit in our conversation about how it truly needs to be a vehicle for the brand. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, and that's exactly it. We kind of with our process, it's a brand first approach. That's kind of what we're calling it.
Mhm.
Everyone jumping on the tech train, the chatbots, AI, all that. It's all well and good, and I think there's a place for it.
Mhm.
But there's also this misconception that that will solve a problem of whether it's driving bookings or whether it's driving visibility or connection to the guest. Technology will not do that by itself. It's a great thing to layer on top with what we call like pouring fuel on the flame. But the flame itself is the brand. That's where the real connection comes from when the guest lands on your website, lands on the social media, which is typically the first touch point before they book or before they do a bit more research.
Mhm.
And that's where the strongest connection is made. It's through the brand, it's through the brand expression. So what does that mean exactly? It's what can the guest expect from looking at your website? What kind of emotion do they feel from looking at it? Is it very clean, modern? Is it more luxurious and ornate? Is it kind of a boho style? Why is that important? Because each guest is different in some way and they have their own personality. So I always try to explain it kind of circa as the name circa came from this idea of a point in time. And that's kind
Mhm.
of a delineation for a point of time. And on the one side, you have the brand, and on the other side, you have the guest. And the brand's understanding of the guest is one thing. So, what are their preferences? What do they enjoy in life? What are their values? That's one thing. And on the other side, we have the brand itself, the expression of the brand. What does the ownership want to do? What does the hotelier want to do? So when those 2 points are in a place of consistency, it's a kind of a special point in the middle where both parties understand one another. That's
Mhm.
really where magic happens. So tech comes after that. Your beautiful booking engine and your chatbot are not going to do much for your overall revenues or overall bookings if you're not actually connecting to the guests in an emotional way. If your website and brand doesn't build trust, having a nice booking engine is not going to make the difference. So we always say brand first, lay the foundations, and then really pour fire on the flame with technology and automation and all that.
I just really resonate with everything you're saying. It's so important. And every time I think about it, I'm just stunned by how simple and intuitive it is, how logical it is, and yet how many people miss the boat on it. Um, when you're speaking about the website being the first touch point and all of these different styles, and you did mention that hopefully when you come in with your vision for your property, you do know who your guest is, you know, who your I hate to use the word that all these cliche terms, but your avatar or your, you know, your demographic, whatever, what they want. So much of it is subconscious, isn't it? That they don't even realize what's happening. They're just kind of showing up and they start feeling something. And we have to be aware and cognizant of how to um I was going to say control it. It's not really controlling it, but how to use that to serve them better, really, to create the guest journey from the very, very beginning. So, how do you use tech on the website? Are you guys doing chatbots and like how do you implement that from the very beginning?
So there's a very long conversation that happens around tech because there's so many tech providers, there's so many options in terms of why you're using them and what the functionality and the purpose could be. It requires certain different types of budgets depending on what kind of platform or what kind of technology you're using. So it's again a conversation that comes later in the process. From our experience, it's conversation starts early for sure, but there's usually a vetting process. There's demos to see, if the backend teams can work with this, if it integrates with other systems that they have. So
Mhm.
generally, it's an important topic because tech is important through at a point after when the guest decides to book. If a guest decides to book and
Exactly. Yeah.
booking form is a contact form where they have to type in their information, kind of like a request form.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's tricky on the guest side, but it's also tricky on the ownership side or the staff side, where they have to filter through all of these request forms and try to kind of
Mhm.
organize all this. So we do have kind of brands or tech providers that we do prefer in a certain way that, in terms of their booking flow is beautiful. You can customize it and actually make it consistent with your brand. It works well on mobile. Things like that are super important.
Yeah.
But those things are only really revealed when the guest has that decision to book, for example.
Hmm.
So the discussions are always ongoing, and there's a kind of a vetting process, and we provide some options of what we think might
Yeah.
work depending on budget. So it is critically important because guests are expecting that seamless experience, but
Hmm.
guests are also expecting first to be able to feel something from the brand and be connected to the brand,
Right.
want to visit. So it's kind of they run in parallel, but one is kind of at a higher level driving everything, and that's the brand.
Yes, I completely agree and understand. I think the tricky part, well, there's two tricky things that come to my mind. One is that we're so savvy with tech now as as consumers. We're just used to it. And
Mhm.
so automatically we assume and expect things. I don't know if everyone else is like this, but I'm very impatient. So if something doesn't connect right with me, I just boom, unsubscribe or stop. Like you're not gonna talk to me like that. Is kind of how I feel, right? I want just the right amount. But if I need you and you're not there, that's even worse, right?
Mhm.
It's like, why did they give up on me? I was considering coming to their place, why am I not important? I mean, we don't voice that, but inside it kind of feels that way, right? Like, oh, they just disappeared. So navigating all of those delicate nuances with technology is really tricky. And then the second thing, and I want you to speak to both if you would, is of course the messaging.
Mhm.
So if you have this really lovely feeling and then you book and then you start getting these random robotic, it just feels terrible.
Yeah, yeah, that's two fantastic points. Thank you for bringing them up because they're really important. The first one regarding being used to technology, that's I think I wrote about that in a recent post of mine on LinkedIn. It's because we have products like Uber Eats,
Yes.
Instagram, etc. The general population is very used to great user experience. They know
Hmm.
what to expect in terms of how an app functions or how a website functions, how it can be used. The familiarity is there. So when they land, especially if we're talking kind of with our audience, boutique hotels, independent hotels, smaller properties, a lot of the time their websites and their user experience is not at that level in terms of how it feels and how it works and how it looks. So there's a general, what we call like design language understanding across the population purely because of these products that are now super low cost. You're buying
Yeah.
an average order on Uber Eats, let's say $30, $40, whatever it might be, while a hotel you're booking for 150, 180, $200 per night, the
Right.
hotel doesn't reflect that. So there's kind of this
Mhm.
dissonance that goes on. And that continues in your second point about communication. So brand dissonance is basically where there's an expectation that's set, something happens, and it breaks that expectation. So there's kind of this
Right.
strange inconsistency, and you don't know, like it kind of breaks trust. So
It
your
does.
example,
It breaks
email,
trust for sure. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. So
that's so
it's a big deal. Go ahead.
it's a big deal because yes, those things might seem insignificant. Like, oh, the guest booked, we can just send them this really basic email, which I mean, in the beginning, it's like booking confirmations, all technical details, your information's safe with us, blah, blah, blah. But you
Mhm.
actually have an opportunity to send follow-up emails before the guest arrives, which is branded and has a tone of voice and gets them even more
That's
excited. You can upsell, you can tell them about experiences in the town or in the region they're in. So how do we extend the brand to those places is really important to continue the experience so that they're excited when they reach the property and it's not just book confirmation 3 4 weeks 3 months whatever it might be later come to the property. So there's a really good opportunity there to not just have a revenue building activity but also a brand building activity.
yeah, so many opportunities. Omar, I think today is Groundhog's Day here. Friday. Could be, and I know that seems random, but I always think of that movie on Groundhog's Day called Groundhog's Day. And as you were speaking, I don't know why it popped into my head, but uh, that movie is such a good example of, because I do think of the guest experience and sales and everything. It's kind of like a romantic relationship. It's like dating, right? So you don't really know. I mean, so oftentimes, and like the reason I referenced that movie is that he kept trying again and again. It's like, this is what we do, right? We're like, why did I get a bad review? Or where are my reviews? Or how do we know where the brand message is breaking down? And most often, just as in a human relationship or dating or whatever, your guest isn't going to call you up and say, that text you sent me just didn't feel good, or I wish you would have sent it 10 minutes earlier because I just made a different decision. Like there's a lot of guesswork that goes into it. And I think many, many people think, to your point earlier, that if they simply buy the thing, oh, this is a cool gadget, this is a cool AI or whatever version of AI you are using. That's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much to consider and so much risk that you have to mitigate, because you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, or you just neglect them, and they're building up, like subconsciously they're building up reasons why not to come back, right? You've got to give them 6 times what you think you need to. So gosh, you're in a tricky area of this. What are you doing? How did
It's
you choose this particular area to work in?
that's what you mentioned is really important because the whole aspect of it being like a relationship, let's say, and having consistency in a relationship is really important.
Yeah,
So the same applies with a brand because a lot of people these days, most people I would say, have relationships with brands. They're not buying from companies.
absolutely. That's
So
right.
so that consistency is actually the requirement of consistency, let's say, and the challenge of it is actually an opportunity because if you are consistent and do show up in the right way at every step of the way, then that's where you build loyalty. That's where you build word of mouth. That's where you are able to have higher ADRs and get more press and things like that because the experience has been so consistent and curated and tailored to the guest profile, persona, muse, whatever you would like to call it. That it's an opportunity, but it's really considering, how far do we want to go with that and who's going to do that? Because a lot of
That's
times
right.
operators, if you don't have a team on site or if you're not working with anyone, it's very tricky. They're already so busy. So
Very
that's kind of
tricky.
what we help with. That's our specialty is really honing in on the messaging, the visual language, the consistency across the guest journey so that everything the guest might touch is in the right place.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's really important. And like you said, once you start getting those breaks in
Hmm.
consistency, you lose trust. And that is the same for a relationship, I would say.
Yeah, I really, really like that so very much. It is such an opportunity for it increases your revenue, like you mentioned earlier, upselling. I mean, we could talk about this for months, honestly. And when you are opening a property or you're rehabbing a property or whatever you guys are doing out there, I don't know who's watching this or what people are doing, but it's so easy to get caught in the weeds of all the things that have to be done. And this this is the most important, I truly believe. It's like, when you're saying it's not the accommodations necessarily. I mean, you can go into a place and have a lot of things go wrong, but if the communication is right and you're being addressed at those touch points and you have that kind of human interaction that is facilitated with your tech, that covers a lot of other things that maybe are not working perfectly. But hospitality is an overwhelming responsibility. I mean, you can't really ignore anything. So anybody that is ignoring this, here's your beautiful opportunity. And I love that. So how, when you, like, if I came to you and I said, this is, we have the vision session or whatever you do, and we're really clear on the brand and the booking engine is excellent. And oftentimes now the booking engines are providing a lot of that, right? They'll follow up with a text and they have a lot of that integrated. I don't know if it's to this level. So do you work with like existing booking software? Do you come in and help assist? What does that look like?
Yeah. Also, just one thing to touch on what you said previously there about the hospitality side and the communication side.
Yeah.
A very important thing that we don't personally touch. We don't touch on-site in terms of staff experience with the guests. That's something you're
Yeah.
very good with, and from your book, I saw the nuance and the level of detail that of experience that you had.
Mhm.
That's not something we touch, but that is for sure influenced from the strategy that we
Yes.
develop in building the brand. If you're staying at the W, let's say, the staff should know what kind of recommendations those guests are looking for who are staying at the W. They're probably more social, nightlife influenced, partying, music, etc. You're not going
Mhm.
to recommend going potentially, unless you know the guests very well, going to a farm to do like
Right.
a berry picking experience.
Right.
No judgment, but that might not be the best recommendation. So that's something we don't personally touch, but I think you're incredibly diligent with and have a like high EQ, I think is the word for that part. But I just wanted to mention that because that's the other side of like when the guest reaches the property, there's a
Yeah.
lot of interactions with staff, things going wrong, things going right, communication. That I think that's where, from what I've seen, your strength really lies in your understanding and your communication. Um,
Yeah. Thank you. I do think tech can facilitate that. And I'm sure you know this, but when they check in, getting this happened to me just a couple weeks ago. I loved that I checked in and immediately, well, like within 5 or 10 minutes, I had a text just saying welcome, just making sure everything is okay. And I did have some questions, and then I got a reply. It was like, wow, they are attentive. They know what I'm doing. But they're not trying to like sell me anything too soon or whatever. We learn so much just from traveling, don't we? Like having our own experiences and those little nuances are so important. So um, yeah, I don't know. I really enjoy this conversation. I actually want to talk with you some more to understand more of how you can integrate those things because what we want, you know what it's like when if I'm on site somewhere creating an experience, right? Like this one I was just at in Wyoming last weekend. Um, it's like we all want a personal assistant. That is what tech is to me. Every time you feel like, gosh, I wish somebody else would do this for me, that's how we can use tech, where it's just like, I wish I had time to run over and check on that guest, or I wish I had time just to ask them before they leave the property how they are feeling, or after they went on that jaunt, the fishing trip, or the berry picking, or whatever it is. All those places you can't really be there for them at that moment, tech can be there.
100%. And that's where really the power of tech, and this is kind of the language that's being used by those tech providers, which I wholeheartedly agree with. It's that you're like properties are leveraging tech not to replace people, but to allow them to have better interactions that are more human with the guests. And that's critical. It's not about like using technology
Yeah.
to automate something and then firing that person. It's actually liberating them to actually have a human experience that really takes it to another level. That's where understanding personalization, even though you can do it through your CRM, through your guest preferences, whatever it might be, but the
Mhm.
conversation that a guest have with someone on the staff is will provide much richer information than any technology will. So yeah, for sure, technology will liberate some of the staff from having to do those mundane things, cutting cards, sending checkout surveys, whatever it might be. But the alternative to that is, or the other side of that is that they should go to the guests and have proper conversations, really learn about them, they're on the ground. They will understand the guest better than anyone else.
Yeah,
So it's really an interesting dynamic between technology and real people on site that's has to be managed in a way. It's not either or, it's just to what degree.
it is. You said it so beautifully. I feel like we can end right there unless you want to repeat it one more time. I think it was so well said. And so you're taking the transactional stuff out of the picture and handling it. Gosh, that's a dream come true, isn't it? So you can
Yeah.
just be human and take care of people.
Mhm. And usually
Yeah.
those the human experiences we have on property, I remember from my travels, is are the things that I remember. I don't remember the time that I paid my bill with my credit card at the restaurant in the hotel. I remember when the waiter came and knelt down to my dad to talk about the wine list. That's what I remember. The service and the quality of the service with humans. So yeah, I think focusing on that part of it and really elevating the interaction person to person is key, and that comes through in many ways leveraging technology to help liberate these people to do that. So yeah, I
That's
think
really beautiful. I was just going to ask you, is there a particular memory that you have? And that's such a powerful image, isn't it? Especially for a child. Like there's something about the act of kneeling down. I had that happen once in a restaurant too. And it just kind of, it's like, why are they doing that? And then you realize that all of their attention is like right there. It's like you just, the focal point becomes that moment. And
mhm,
that's what you remember from how many years ago?
yeah,
You
a
know?
very long time ago. And what's probably even more vivid about that is that the night before that, we were at another F&B concept in the hotel, and very different
Mm,
experience there. The waiter was standing above. He wasn't looking at
mm,
us when he's taking the order. He didn't communicate very well. So just the contrast between those two experiences really stuck with me. And,
interesting.
and I really, whenever I mention that I'm a partner at a restaurant here, I really, and I see that happening at our restaurants, that the staff, when they're talking to a guest, they kneel down. We're on eye level. We're equal. We're not looking down. We're listening to what you have to say. You have our full attention. So those are the things we remember about travel and hospitality is people.
That's right. It's so simple. I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you for your time today. I'm sure this has been valuable for anyone who is here or will see it soon. And I wish you a very happy Groundhog's Day. I
Likewise, it's been a
think it's a
pleasure.
funny day. It sure feels like spring here. So,
You're lucky. You're lucky. It's cloudy and gray here, so we're waiting a few more months till we get that sun back.
well, in Colorado, spring is when it starts snowing. So you can kind of feel like, oh, it's all sunny and there's something wet in the air, and you know that we're about to start getting snow for the next month. So, yeah. Anyway, this has been just delightful. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody will take whatever you learned from today and go out and apply it. And it's very simple, but the number of people who actually take the time to do these things, not very many. It's just easier not to. So we do have such a beautiful opportunity. And hopefully, what's the name of your restaurant in Montreal?
It's called Henny. It's a Arabic word which means jovial.
Oh, how do you spell that? H,
Heni.
okay. Well, I will look that up and I'll put a link in one of the comments. And do you want to just tell people where they can find you if they feel like reaching out to you?
Sure. Yeah. And first of all, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Our first conversation that wasn't recorded was also fantastic, and
It
I appreciate
was.
your insights and your views. So thank you for having me on. And if anyone wants to reach out to us, we're at Studio Circa on LinkedIn, or you can get in touch with me directly, or studio-circa.com.
Great. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend, and we'll talk really soon. Thank you, Omar.
Guys.
Cheers.